Texas represents leadership, hope, patriotism, and pride. It's a place where people of all cultures and creeds live, work, and raise their families together. It's a place full of opportunity. Unfortunately, under Republican control, Texas is going backward. That trend is coming to an end. It's time for a new vision in Texas. I am running for Texas Controller because I want to be part of the new generations of leaders who will bring Texas back to the 21st century and position it for a strong future. I am committed to a transparent tax administration and to establishing a vibrant economy with thriving jobs, so you can provide for your family and maintain a healthy life balance. You deserve an inclusive Texas, a Texas that embraces diversity, where no matter where you were born, the color of your skin, or the language you speak, you are welcome. You deserve a Texas that treats women equally in all areas, including equal pay and the right to make their own medical decisions. You deserve a Texas that recognizes that love is love. A Texas where all faiths, traditions are welcome, and where church and state are truly separating governmental decisions. A Texas that welcomes new business ventures and give employees the right to organize and unionize. A Texas that respects and embraces data and science, where government leaders do their elected jobs of working for the best interests of all Texans, not special interest groups. A Texas that guarantees easy access to voting for all citizens. You deserve a Texas that repeals race suppression, where no matter your zip code, you will have access to health care, clean water, electricity, high-speed internet, and excellent education, and the resources to support your family. You deserve a Texas where you feel safe in our cities and towns, as well as in your own home. That Texas is possible with new leadership. I am running for office because it's time to bring this new vision to life. It's time to bring Texas back to the people.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Progressive West Texas, the show where we talk to leaders trying to make positive change in our community. I'm your host, Cannon Roberts, also known as West Texas Progressive on TikTok and Instagram. We have a really good show. I'm really excited about this show. First, we're going to talk to Kim Gonzales. Kim and I have become friends over the last year, and she is a powerhouse of an activist and organizer. We first met when I was running Tom Watson's campaign. That was the last congressional campaign I ran here in West Texas. She gave rights to the polls. She helped do lit drops. She's then become very involved in Planned Parenthood and reproductive justice. She organized last fall's Women's March here in Lubbock that had quite several hundred people there, which is really good for our area. So we're going to talk about the work she does with Jane's Due Process. They are a nonprofit out of Austin they focus on young women, helping young women have access to reproductive health care. So I'm going to let Kim tell you more about that. Then we are joined by a couple of Texas Tech students. Caitlyn Alexander is one of my interns with Rideshare to Vote Aware. When she came in as an intern, I asked my interns, what is their why? Why do they want to make a difference? Why do they want to become better activists and organizers? And her answer was because of reproductive justice. We are also joined by Wishika Kumar. She is the president of Raiders for Reproductive Rights. That is a student organization at Texas Tech University trying to enhance reproductive rights in our area. We have a really great conversation about all the things that are happening. We talk about their experiences as women with healthcare, as well as the activism that they are doing right now. It's a really good conversation. I hope you stay for the whole thing, but let's jump into it. Let's meet Kim Gonzales. Hi, Kim. How are you?
Hey, Cannon. I'm good. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm excited about our conversation here. So you are working with Jane's Due Process here in Lubbock to help give women access to the reproductive, rights that they deserve and the care. So can you tell us a little bit about Jane's Due Process and the work you do with them?
Sure. So I've done a lot of volunteerism type things in the women's repro justice realm, and Jane's Due Process is one of my favorites. They just started doing their program here in Lubbock a few months ago, so it's still fairly new. Jane's Due Process is a nonprofit out of Austin, Texas, and primarily their goal is to help girls 14 and older make sure that they have emergency contraceptives when they need it. They help young girls with judicial bypass. So if they're under the age of 18 and they need an abortion, Jane's Due Process will provide them a judicial advocate to help them through that court system. And so those are the two main goals of Jane's Due Process. And so what the program does here in Lubbock specifically is there's a text hotline so that Janes can text in, and it's anonymous. They text in and they say, hey, I need emergency contraceptive. I need Plan B. And so someone on the end of the text line gets their information when they need it by the general location. And then there's a group of us volunteers who are notified that, a Jane needs a kit by this date, this time, in this location. And so one of us will pick it up. There's about 30 volunteers now in Lubbock, I think, which is pretty cool. It's a really good sized pool of volunteers. And so one of us will just pick that request up, and then we take them a kit. And so what a kit consists of is it's 2 doses of Plan B, which is the morning after pill. And then there's 2 pregnancy tests, a couple of condoms, and then a brochure, just some information, basically how to use the Plan B and what to expect. And so once we get that dispatch, then, we take the kit and we drop it off. And sometimes it seems like you're kind of a secret agent because you don't know the person you're taking it to. You never see their face. And sometimes I'm literally leaving a kit, behind a trash can at Starbucks, over by Tech, or putting it under a bush on campus or something like that. And so once the kit has been dropped, then I text the hotline back and say, I've made the drop. And then they let the Jane know, and then she goes and retrieves her kit. So she never sees me. I never see her. We don't exchange names or anything like that. So it's totally anonymous, but it's giving, young Janes in Lubbock an opportunity to make sure that their reproductive needs are taken care of when maybe they didn't have the money to do that before, or they didn't have the transportation to pick up, what they need to take care of themselves. And so we're providing that service to them free of charge.
Awesome. So why is that kind of secret agent? Why does that happen? Why is that part of this?
Well, obviously it's to protect their identity. Some people don't feel comfortable. There's still some shaming that happens here in this conservative West Texas town of Lubbock about contraceptive, and especially things like, the morning after pill. And so it's to protect them. And then I think also to protect us, there's this veil of anonymity there. And so the hotline text workers, they get, the information from both sides, but the Jane and the delivery driver know nothing about each other than I dropped a kit at Starbucks at 3 p.m. on Friday. So, yeah.
So what are the legal implications here? Because all these things that you are providing are legal and, and should be freely available. So why is there a need for this when these are all things that are legal and available?
Well, the reason there's a need is because there's a lack of access. Just like there's always been for women when it comes to reproductive health care, when it, from birth control pills to morning after pills to abortion, there's always been an access issue for women. And it's really sad to say that in the year 2022, we still have access issues. So just like I was mentioning before, they may not have the money to go down to Walgreens and ask for Plan B. They might be underage and they might need a parent's permission or approval to do something like that. Maybe they don't have a car to drive. We've even talked about, they have empowerment kits at our Planned Parenthood clinic here in Lubbock, which are very similar to the kits that we drop off for Jane's Due Process. But how are people supposed to get there if they don't have a car and they're 15 years old? The bus routes here in Lubbock aren't sufficient. There's lots of barriers. And so just having a system like Jane's Due Process text hotline in place really opens up a lot of opportunities for young girls when they need emergency contraceptives or condoms or, whatever their needs are.
So how did you get involved in reproductive justice generally, and then specifically, how did you get involved with Jane's Due Process?
Sure. So a couple of years ago, our Planned Parenthood clinic was coming back to Lubbock, And Ruth Bader Ginsburg had recently passed away, and there was a vigil for her at the courthouse. And I was there because I was always a big RBG fan. And one of the speakers at the vigil mentioned that Planned Parenthood was coming back to town, and I just knew I had to get involved. I didn't know what that was going to look like, but really felt passionate that this was something that I should step into. And so I started reaching out and volunteering. Before you know it, I was planning protests. My very first protest, actually, was a counter protest, I should clarify. So for those that don't know, here in Lubbock, there was a sanctuary city ordinance that our city faced that was trying to outlaw abortion. This was before SB 8. And so in Lubbock, it was known as Prop A. And so we were doing counter protests because obviously we liked Planned Parenthood. We wanted to keep Planned Parenthood, and we didn't agree with Proposition A in this ordinance. And so my very first protest, there were 3 people. It was myself and 2 other people. And so I think my second protest, I had 15 people. And then my most recent protest was last October, where I had some estimates between 350 and 400 people.
Yeah.
So really a movement began to grow here in Lubbock, and I was kind of at the beginning or the forefront of that. Through my activism, just organizing protests and making sure people were aware of what was going on in our city. I joined a PAC which helped to fight that sanctuary city or the sanctuary city ordinance Prop A here in Lubbock, and worked directly with Planned Parenthood and some other local organizers to just, do block walking and phone banking and register voters and all the things that we could do within our power with the little money that we had, to try to fight that. And so, I think that through that, I really decided that I like this kind of community organizing and activism. And there's more organizations out there that are doing great things for women. And so I started exploring that a little bit more, and I found Jane's Due Process. Like I said, there's 30 volunteers here now in Lubbock that work for Jane's Due Process, and some of them do the text hotline. So they take the intake of the information, and then some of us are drivers. And so I'm on the driving end of that. Something else that I've been involved with is through ACLU Texas. There's a program called the Texas Abortion Access Network, and they have this 12-week training program, and it's called a cohort. And so you meet once a week on Zoom, usually in the evening. They even provide you a small stipend for attending the classes. And it's very small, but it's something. And the goal of that there is just to train other advocates and make sure that we know how to advocate for women's reproductive rights and justice, how to speak about abortion, how to organize in our communities, how to fundraise, all of the things that would be relevant to, having a successful movement. So they're training new advocates all the time. And I know that Texas Abortion Access Network, I graduated from the second cohort of that in 2020, and they just finished up their third round of that. And so if that's something that anyone else is interested in to become, a stronger, better advocate, that's something that I would encourage anyone to look into. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. So just to give a little bit of context for the viewers that aren't aware and maybe outside of our area. So Lubbock became the biggest, so this was May of 2021. Lubbock became the biggest anti-abortion city in the country. Now, what happened kind of, I don't know, like it's a bad thing, but when SB 8 was passed, which is the statewide 6-week ban that is going to be heard by the Supreme Court, that superseded the city's ordinance, because SB 8 goes further. People can do more. But even if SB 8 gets struck down, we will then still have to deal with this ordinance. So depending on how they strike it down, it could strike down our city ordinance, but there is the possibility that the state law gets struck down, but we still have this ordinance. So if the state of Texas, even if we get some reprieve, Lubbock will still have to deal with that. And that was, you're right, that was a big push. We had some of our biggest churches were behind that abortion ban. They are, not doing anything to support the foster care system, children's homes, anything like that, but they were all about spending lots of money to get that abortion ban. So Kim, how can others help? How can others get involved with either Jane's Due Process, or just get involved with the organizing work that you're doing and help with this reproductive justice here in Lubbock?
Sure. So we always need more volunteers because, I'm sure you've heard the saying, many hands make light work. So one of the things we're trying to do with Jane's Due Process is just get the word out that program exists here in Lubbock. We've got a good pool of volunteers, and some days we have 3 or 4 requests, and sometimes we'll go 3 or 4 days without a request. So the more we can get the word out about that, the more fruitful and beneficial that program can be. So that would be one good way to get involved, is just help spread the word about what Jane's Due Process is doing. We have some stickers that we go around and stick around towns in bathrooms so that girls know that it's available. We could always use more volunteers for delivery drivers or for the hotline. There's ways to get involved with our local Planned Parenthood clinic. They do tabling events at community events around town. So if you wanted to do something like that, you could join Planned Parenthood at a tabling event. The best way to get involved there is to go to one of those events and talk to some of the people at the tabling, and you can sign up and get connected that way. And then if you wanted to do the 12-week cohort training program that I mentioned, you can go to the Texas Abortion Access Network website and just hit the Contact Us link and fill out the information, let them know that you're interested in that. And Blair Wallace from ACLU Texas is the one that runs that program, and she would be delighted for you all to reach out to her and have more people join.
Yeah, that would be great. So what is the number that people can text for that? Can you share that, or
Yeah,
oh,
pull it up on
should,
my phone. I wasn't prepared, but I can get it real quick.
should I have warned you about
Yeah.
that?
Yes.
I thought you were going to mention it at some point.
So the
So
phone number is 1-866-999-5263. So that's the Jane's Due Process text hotline.
can you repeat that one more time?
866-999-5263.
5263. Okay. And so if anyone is in need of pregnancy test, Plan B, they can text that, get the request. And then what's the process behind that? Is it like after they make that request, what should these women expect after that?
So it's pretty real time. They send a text message. There's a volunteer on the other end that's, signed up for that shift, and they're taking the incoming, requests.
Mm-hmm.
We have a group on an app that has all of our volunteer drivers in it, and they literally just post it in there, and whoever can get to it first picks it up. As soon as we pick it up, the dispatcher lets the Jane know this has been picked up, and they're en route, as you should get your kit in 15 minutes or in 1 hour, whatever the timeline is going to be. And then as soon as we've dropped it, we let them know that the kit has been left, and then the Jane gets another text message saying your kit has arrived at the pre-designated location. So it's pretty real time, and it can happen sometimes in as short as 30 minutes. Sometimes we do it the following day, just depending on what the request looked like and how urgent the request is, because obviously it's time sensitive sometimes.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that's a really great service and a really good opportunity for people to get involved in. And I think, Kim, I know you're doing lots of really good work in our city. And I think a lot of times, so again, for the audience, Kim and I, we got to know each other with some of this organizing work. But one of the ways that we connected was through Rideshare to Vote, which is the nonprofit that I work for. And she wanted to do, and I should let you tell this story, I guess, but how you wanted to do something concrete to help. And so you started giving rides to the polls. And a lot of people want that kind of concrete action to take. And it seems like with Jane's Due Process, like that's a really good way of taking concrete action rather than just posting on social media.
Yeah, I really love the Jane's Due Process volunteer opportunity because I know that I've helped someone
Mm-hmm.
immediately.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes when we're doing some of the things that we do that Cannon and I are involved in for community organization, we know that there's kind of a long view to it. And sometimes the little individual steps we take, you don't see the payoff right away, but you know that it's cumulative and you just got to keep chipping away, right? When I go and drop a kit of Plan B off to a Jane, I know that I've helped her today.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very fulfilling for me. And, and obviously women's reproductive rights is something that I'm passionate about. And so I love knowing when I've driven away that I've empowered a young girl or a woman,
Mm-hmm.
and that I've given her the opportunity to make decisions for herself that maybe someone else wasn't willing to give her. And so, that's the reason I love that one in particular so much.
That's great. Yeah, I think that empowerment, as a male, I have a hard time comprehending that. Like somebody telling me that I can't do something with my body, or someone making me do something with my body. And so I think that's really important to listen to the stories about what that feels like and what that is like. Well, Kim,
I want to share one story that
okay,
I just
absolutely.
one delivery that I made. And of course, like I said, I don't know their names. I don't know their ages. All I know is what the ask was for the drop. And one day I got a text that we needed to deliver a kit. And the Jane said, I need you to leave the kit underneath the wheel of the Mercedes parked on the curb because I don't want my parents to find it.
Mhm.
And so, going and dropping that and knowing that I helped her and, potentially saving lives, you don't know
Right.
the whole backstory behind what's going on with these girls and young women. And, potentially we're saving lives. And so it's just really powerful.
Yeah. Well, and that's the important thing that I think a lot of people don't understand about reproductive rights and access to abortion in general is that it does save lives.
Mhm.
And the narrative that we currently have is the opposite of that. It says that it's stopping lives, but that is not the case. It
Right.
saves the lives of women every year. So, well, let's talk to a couple of we'll say newer, younger activists that are involved in this, and let's bring on Caitlyn and Rashika. Hey, y'all, how are y'all doing?
Hey. Hi. Doing
Doing
good.
good.
Awesome. So now that I feel like the elder organizers have discussed our work, we're going to bring you into the conversation, talk about the work y'all are doing on the Texas Tech campus. But I want to start with the question that I always like starting with the groups, and that is, what do you like about Lubbock or West Texas? It's really easy to get down on our area. I know that, growing up when I was in high school and college, everyone was like, we hate Lubbock. We want to get out of here as soon as we can. But so many people from this area, which I'm not sure, Rashika, if you are. I know Caitlyn's not. So many people from this area, we talk about how much we dislike it, and then we come back. And I think there's a reason we come back. A lot of times that's family connection, but I think it's also because we don't pay a lot of attention to the things that we actually like about our area. So, Kim, I'm going to start with you. What's one thing you like about Lubbock or West Texas?
One thing I like about Lubbock is that it's definitely like a friendly environment. People genuinely do have that like Southern hospitality. And then also it's like a slower pace. And so I think that like both of those things kind of make it enjoyable and welcoming.
Mm-hmm. And Rashika?
Honestly, I like the campus itself. I know Lubbock, at least for me, the university is like sort of a landmark of Lubbock, and I love the variety of organizations both on and off campus. If you're interested in something, there's probably an organization for it.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Awesome. And what about you, Kim?
So this is easy for me because I did move away and then come back. And so I know exactly why I came back. I missed the sunshine when I moved away. So we have these big open blue skies and the sun shines like 300 and something days a year. And when you're used to that being, someone that grew up in West Texas and you move away from it, it was a big deal for me. So I definitely like all the sunshine we get.
Yeah. Yeah, that was when I first moved away, that was a huge thing for me. And I was living in what I'm going to refer to as upstate New York. Half of New York is going to be mad that I call Binghamton upstate. But yeah, the cold and the snow were miserable. One of the things that happened, my dad went up there with me to look for an apartment, and he's an architect, and so he looks at spaces differently than like what I'm going to refer to as normal people. And so there was like this big expansive basement apartment that I really wanted. He was like, no, it's going to be too dark. And so I ended up getting one that was like on the third floor. There was a lot of sunlight. Little did we know that, like, for about 5 months out of the year, the sun in the East Coast goes down at 4 p.m. And it doesn't matter if you're above ground or below it, it's going to be dark. And so Lubbock definitely doesn't have that. We have lots of sunshine. So I appreciate that too. So Kim talked about how she got involved with reproductive justice, reproductive rights. And so, Rashika, I want to start with you and ask, how did you get involved in this area?
I guess it was sort of by accident. So I had been calling, I think Planned Parenthood itself to create a Planned Parenthood like club on campus.
Mhm.
And then I found out that one was already created, and Sophia, who is no longer working with Planned Parenthood, but used to be like some sort of community outreach employee in the Lubbock one, called me back and she said like, hey, we have a secretary position open for this club that is already actually existing in Texas Tech. So I joined that, and then long story short, I ended up becoming the president of it. And yeah, we've been trying to do work with reproductive rights ever since.
And what's the organization called?
Raiders for Reproductive Rights.
Okay. And why was that the area you wanted to work in the first place?
I I am passionate about reproductive rights as well, but more than that, I just the opposition, the pro-life side, I feel like we have more in common than they think. I feel like especially pro-lifers, they always think pro-choicers are like pro like murder, and they love to use these words that are like attention catching. I don't think there has ever been a pro-choicer who has woken up in the morning and said, "You know what? I want to kill my baby today for fun." That has never happened, but that is the narrative that is pushed on Fox News, on conservative websites, that like every time someone aborts their baby, it's because of necessity. It's not because it's out of fun or whatever. And oftentimes this is a bit of a tangent, but I want to explain why I'm passionate about this. Oftentimes like the narrative I see, or the most commonly used reason used by pro-lifers to stop legislation that is like pro-choice is, oh, well, it's not morally okay. That is the exact reason why we are called pro-choice and not pro-abortion. It's because even if you are morally against it, you don't have to have an abortion, but you shouldn't be stopping someone else from having an abortion either. The example I use is the military. There are a ton of religions out there that do not allow people to sign up to the military because you can't kill anyone in their religion. But that doesn't mean other people in other religions can't sign up for the military, right? So you have a choice to sign up for the military, just like how you have a choice to get an abortion. And yeah, and I wish like people on, especially on the other side, would like understand this analogy that I'm using, because I feel like that shows like we have more in common than they think, and maybe get some pro-lifers onto our side. So yeah, that's my reason. Sorry for the long story.
No, that's what we're here for those conversations. And yeah, I think you're right. And a lot, especially in our area, a lot of people are going to use the excuse of religion, but one thing, I'm gonna preach for a second. One thing that Jesus never says is to stop other people from doing what you think is wrong. He never says that, and like that is what they're trying to do. He specifically says take the log out of your own eye. And so yeah, I think that that's a really good point, and it can be very frustrating, as people who may not follow like whatever the dominant mainstream thought or religion is in a community, being forced to have to follow those, even though there is not only is there difference in opinion among the mainstream Christians in town, but there in every church we have, there are women who have had abortions, and sometimes they will reframe it. I know that I've talked to religious leaders who get mad when people refer to terminating an ectopic pregnancy as an abortion, but it is the same thing. And so yeah, I totally understand where you're coming from, and I appreciate that story. Caitlyn, what about you?
So I'm a philosophy major, and here at Tech they have like a ethics concentration track. And so one of the topics that we've covered in like a few of my classes is abortion. And I was already pro-life and everything, but like learning the argumentative side and the logical reasoning behind the arguments kind of like made me more passionate about it. And I've taken an interest in like feminist ethics. And so that kind of got me started. And then this semester, I got connected with a local Planned Parenthood, who then connected me with Raiders for Reproductive Rights.
Awesome. And so, what is the mission or end goal And Wishika, I'll start with you since you're the president. What is the mission and goal of Raiders for Reproductive Rights?
The mission is exactly the same mission that Planned Parenthood has. I always say this is a student organization on campus that pushes the mission of Planned Parenthood. So basically, for example, we pass out condoms, the empowerment kits. I think they have emergency contraceptive, they have condoms, and they have pregnancy tests, I believe. When I want to get my hands on some of those so we can pass those out on campus as well. Any sexual health, like dams, we pass those out too. T-shirts, masks that have like the Planned Parenthood, motto on it. Stuff like that, just to really bring to attention what Planned Parenthood does, as well as the sexual health portion. I feel like the word abortion is associated with Planned Parenthood, but the words sexual health is not also associated with Planned Parenthood. The opposition always likes to say, like, defund Planned Parenthood, defund Planned Parenthood. It's like, okay, well, you're going to defund free or cheap sexual reproductive health too that you could be using, even if it's not an abortion related thing. That's like dangerous to you. You understand that, right? Right. So, we try to do those kinds of things.
Yeah, because, and it's not just about pregnancy. As I've complained about before, my silly TikTok about syphilis increase in Lubbock just won't die. It hasn't gotten another bump in a while, but we have major STI breakouts. And one story that I tell about Lubbock, and when it comes to the reproductive rights, is I had a friend about 10 years back who, she was from New Zealand, and her husband moved to Lubbock because she was given a grant she was given a grant to research newborns with meth addiction. So newborns whose mother had used meth throughout their pregnancy. And she looked literally all around the world. And Lubbock was the best place for her to do that research. And so again, while we have this veneer of like, look how, religious we are, we have these really problematic issues that we kind of ignore. And that when our religious community focuses on things like the abortion ban, we don't fix all these other issues that are happening, that are kind of behind the scenes. So I think all that's really great. I want to talk about kind of the latest in kind of some of the, Texas being terrible with the abortion laws. And I want to talk about Lizelle Herrera's arrest. Now, right before we came on, we found out that she was released and that all charges were dropped. But for anyone who hasn't kept up for this, Lizelle Herrera was arrested in Starr County, Texas. That is a county on the Mexico border, and which, when SB 8 was passed, everyone kept saying this is going to harm communities of color. And sure enough, we saw that happen. The prosecutor didn't release a lot of information, but she was charged, with murder, which under SB 8, that shouldn't happen. And so I'm sure now that she's been released and those charges are dropped, I'm sure we'll start hearing more about it. But what we did see is people getting behind her. I know that I saw a lot of big TikTok accounts start talking about it immediately. Victoria Hammett, Olivia Juliana, they both jumped on it, and they have massive audiences and sway. And so, Kim, beforehand, you said that this kind of gave you hope. And so what did you appreciate about the reaction to the news that this woman had been arrested?
Yeah, so I think as more of us get involved, locally in our communities, like Wishika and Caitlyn with Raiders for Reproductive Rights, or those of us that are involved with, Jane's Due Process volunteerism. In all of our local communities, we've got little subsets of people that are kind of reproductive justice warriors, right? And so as we follow all of these social media accounts, huge props to the people that let us know immediately when something like this is going on. But they were able to kind of call upon all the troops, if you will, to start a fire, to have their army come in. I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Have their army of warriors come in to fight this, right? And so there were text drives, there were phone bank drives, there were protests yesterday. People were donating money just to come to Miss Herrera's defense, you know, and try to stand up for her and demand that she be released. And so I think because there was such a massive outcrying yesterday, and this went all throughout the day on Saturday. That eventually, like the Starr County Sheriff's Department, their voicemail had been disabled because they had gotten so many voicemail calls about it. I was seeing on Twitter where like the deputy was answering the phone and he was like, "Yeah, we know y'all don't like it. We've heard," you know, like they were getting so many phone calls and everything because there was such a huge reaction. And so it's just really nice that so many of us can get behind something like that and that we're ready and we're queued up and we're, you know, we're ready to defend women when we need to. And I think it really paid off because she was released today on a Sunday and all charges were dropped. And so it just speaks to the power of, you know, organization and all of us coming together and having a common voice and, you know, and standing up for each other because for someone like Miss Herrera, who's, you know, I don't know her background, I don't know her story, but, you know, maybe she doesn't have someone else fighting in her corner. And so to have all of us kind of come together and make the phone calls and send all the tweets and make all of the TikToks and everything, I think all of that really makes a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, as much as we tend to hear like all the downsides of social media and, you know, all the things that it does wrong, clearly like there are really beneficial sides to it. And I think this definitely was one because that turning around in like 72 hours, I know that on Friday night, I was going through Twitter and this was popping up, you know, every other tweet on Twitter. And so having that turnaround and that pressure, I think is really important. And that's one of the great things about social media, because, you know, when you look back to the civil rights movement, you know, you're going to have to stand outside the jailhouse. You were going to have to, you know, do that. Now we can kind of organize on a national level. So, but knowing this, knowing that, you know, this woman was arrested, even though those charges were dropped, does that change or does that worry you in any way about the work you're doing or about, you know, your own lives? That like, if I, you know, if something happens to me, like there's a possibility that I could get arrested, like things could happen. So, you know, Caitlyn, how does that make you feel? Does that worry you or what?
I think in a sense, yes. I would say that like on a personal level, I think that like my fear of like something like that happening is like a bit lower, but it's just scary to see like in general, like the ability for like legislation to take away human rights. Like it's just mind blowing to me. And I mean, as a woman, like my own right to abortion, that part is scary. And so, yeah, I would say like as an organizer though, I think that it can be scary at times, but I feel honestly more fear as a woman, if that makes sense. But yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Wishika?
Honestly, with the Herrera case, I want to like talk about the people of color part of it really quickly. Sorry about the slight tangent, but like I don't normally bring race into things, but this is just not surprising to me. Like the whole impact of people of color communities, because they already typically have like limited access to equitable healthcare as it is. And equitable, as someone who wants to be a doctor, equitable healthcare is something I strive to see, and it's something I hope I can contribute to eventually when I do become a physician. Especially for women, it's already hard enough, like being a female patient walking into a clinic asking for a checkup. I feel like doctors don't take our pain as seriously. Like the first question is always like, oh yeah, when did you get your last period? Or, oh yeah, it could just be something based on a pregnancy, when it could be something much more serious. And then now with abortions, like the ban on abortions happening in this state, it's like, what did you think was going to happen? It's going to exploit a gender that is marginalized. And then it's going to further exploit within that gender people of color communities who are like even more marginalized. Like I just don't understand why people are surprised about this. You know what I mean? So yeah, I hope that's something we can make an impact on in our club as well. So
well, and that is something, I'm really glad you brought that up, because that is something that is a problem in Lubbock that we don't really deal with, that our communities of color do not have the same access to healthcare. And like, people like to jump through hoops to explain why that's not true. But when we were talking to the leaders of Planned Parenthood here in Lubbock, one of them told us that in order for somebody from East Lubbock to use public transportation to get to our Planned Parenthood, which is in the medical district, like it is in Central Lubbock, our Planned Parenthood is where it should be. That for someone in East Lubbock to get there, it would take about an hour and 40 minutes on the bus one way. That is not equal healthcare. That is not equal access for everybody. I'm sure North Lubbock tends to have a little bit more access because they don't have an interstate cutting them off from the rest of the city. But that is absolutely a problem that happens, here in Lubbock. We even have a children's clinic on the east side that is underused, again, because of transportation access, because they cannot, like what they really need is to be able to go to the schools and pick up sick kids and take them back to the clinic. And the city won't let them use some of the public funds that they receive for that. And that's really what they need. And so that equal access is, I think it's really important, and you're right. It's something that does not get discussed enough. Kim, what about for you? What do you, how does that make you feel? Does it worry you?
I know that they've been coming after women's reproductive rights for 100 years. It's no surprise that they keep coming back. Abortion's been legal per the Supreme Court decision in 1976. So for 45 years now, give or take. And that was my biggest fear when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, because she was such an advocate for us on the Supreme Court for women's rights, that when she passed, that we had a lopsided Supreme Court and they were going to come for us. And sure enough, they did. That was already in the works. They were already planning it. It just made it that much easier for them to come for us. So I know they're going to continue to come for our rights. Anyone with a uterus and ovaries is going to be a subject to that. So I'm not surprised that they continue to come, and I'm not really worried that they can continue to come, because I know that we have a lot of advocates. I know that there's a lot of organizations like ACLU and other reproductive rights organizations that are always fighting for us. Planned Parenthood is always fighting for us. There's cases in the court systems right now where they're fighting for our rights. And so it's frustrating that they keep coming after us, but I'm not really worried, because I know that this has been it's been a fight that we've been working on for decades. And unfortunately, we're probably going to keep working on it for decades to come. It's just one of those things that we have to be present for, and we need to train our new young leaders like Wishika and Caitlyn and make sure that they're here to pass the batons off to. I'm so grateful for, the youth and the young tech crowd that we have here in town getting involved. So those things give me hope, just knowing that there's so many of us, and it's an ever-growing community of organizers and supporters.
Yeah. So this might be a little esoteric, but I just, like, as y'all are talking about all the struggles that women have in accessing that healthcare, I just can't help but keep thinking about how, like, I don't have any of those issues. Like, I don't, like, I walk in, if I want a vasectomy, I'm going to get a vasectomy. If I needed, now I can't even think of the name. If I needed, medical pills to help me, to help me have an active sex life, I can get that. No questions asked. That is not the same for y'all. And I think in Alabama, they just passed a law that in order for women to purchase medical marijuana prescribed by a doctor, they have to have received a negative pregnancy test given by a doctor or clinic within the last 48 hours. And so it's not just a matter of abortion access. It is a matter of these things limit what you can do throughout your life. How does it feel knowing that basically we have this new era of almost like separate but equal. This idea that like it's okay that we do these things to women because in the end we're helping them, which obviously that's not the case. So do you find it frustrating, or how does that feel, knowing that like you are under control of the government that men do not have to deal with?
So the fact that a woman can be charged for murder for making a choice about her own body, and a man's never going to be charged for murder for making choices about his own body, is entirely crap. I was going to say something much worse, but trying to keep it PG-13 here. Yeah, it's really unfair, and it's until we have, I feel like until we have more women in leadership, until we have a more equitable representation on the Supreme Court, until we have a more equitable representation of people of color. It's not just a woman issue. Wishika brought this up. These bills and these laws are designed to be oppressive, not only to women, but particularly to people that are, minorities, that are in different socioeconomic groups. And so we need representation in all of those areas to help make sure that we can combat these kinds of things, and that we actually can have that equitable, just across the ground playing field for all people that we deserve.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Caitlyn?
I mean, what comes to mind there is like, I think that, like you were saying with the marijuana legislation, I think that like a lot of it comes down to like the patriarchy and misogyny, and like new scholars are kind of like redefining misogyny as like the enforcement of the patriarchy rather than a generalized hatred towards women. And I think that's very true, like in the sense of like, I think with that legislation is an example of like kind of like labeling and understanding women as like mothers and breeders rather than like independent individuals, and kind of forcing them into that role. And I think that like, obviously that's just another example. But yeah, and I think that kind of like Kim was saying, like working on representation and like getting women in legislation and all of that is going to help towards having our equity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and shout out to Kate Mann in her book
Yes.
Down Girl. Yeah,
that's what I was referencing.
Yeah, no, it's good. She does a really good job of, and it really reframed it for me, like how she presented that.
Yeah.
Wishika, what about you? Do you have feelings, thoughts about this?
Yeah, so I have like kind of a short story, I guess. So I don't know if you are aware of the Planned Parenthood Texas's Youth Power Fellowship training, which I suggest any like young, Caitlyn, if you haven't done that yet, I suggest you do it. It's a great way to get young people like us into the advocacy like side of things. And during part of the training, I remember they invited one of the House of Representatives from Austin to speak. And she said that back when she like graduated high school or something, I don't even know what decade that was in. It was a long time ago, but like during that time, she said she remembered that people, like women, still needed to have their husband's permission to get like birth control or something like that. That is, if we still have people alive today who remember that in their own lifetimes, that should show you that stranglehold on women's rights is still here. Or even if, for those who argue that it's gone away completely, which it hasn't, it should show you it has just finished. This is not a fight that, is like, was done 100 years ago. Like, we're still fighting it now every day. And, oftentimes I hear this thing, oh yeah, it's not women's rights, it's just rights. That's not true. Like, men have to fight. Men will never have to like,
right,
undergo that. You know what I mean? And it's like, will men ever have to carry a baby? No. Will men ever have to go through like morning sickness, the pain? The man can also leave. If the man does not want the child, it's not like it's not like the woman can just like pick up and leave. She has to carry it with her. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like these facts just that are overlooked, they just blow my mind.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't even understand sometimes why there's a debate. Like, we're pro-choice. If you don't want to do it yourself, don't do it. But don't take that away from other people. It's just ridiculous to me.
Yeah. Yeah, we do have a really short kind of memory when it comes to this stuff. So, for example, I'm really interested to see Rashika and Caitlyn, your reaction. Joe might already know this, but most people in Lubbock don't. Roe from Roe versus Wade was from Lubbock. There are several older lawyers here in town that were at the Supreme Court hearing that decided Roe versus Wade because they were involved in that. And so that quickly is forgotten. And and so we don't realize how it wasn't that long ago that people did have to have all these permission, and even talking about not being able to access birth control, but even like accessing a bank account. Like my grandmother will talk about having to get her dad to sign off on her bank account. And I have another grandmother who, she's in her 80s, but she was the first female bank teller in the whole state of Texas. It wasn't that long ago. Then she became the first. I don't know. She had several first, and was the first a loan officer, female loan officer. It wasn't that long ago that we were restricting, what we see as very obvious things that women should have access to. So as you were talking about that, I started thinking about, when during the hearing for Judge Brown Jackson, she was asked by Marsha Blackburn. I'm trying to keep all these names straight in my head. Probably not going to be able to do it. She was asked by Senator Marsha Blackburn, what is a woman? And basically, Ketanji Brown Jackson would not answer, which was probably the smartest thing. But Huffington Post asked several Republican senators the same question. And I think it was Josh Hawley. Maybe it was Mandel who's running. But one of the terrible Joshes, his response was someone who can give birth. And then they said, well, what about women who've gone through menopause? And he goes, okay, fine. Then, a woman with a vagina. And he kept trying to change it. And then they said, well, what about this? What about this? And let alone like all of the scientific things about, chromosomes, and you can have XXX, you can have XXY, you can have just, and so how does it feel to be constantly defined by your reproductive purpose? Because again, not something that I have to do. I'm in my late 30s. I do not have kids. Nobody ever asked me why I don't have kids. I am never asked that question because that's not how I'm defined. So how does it feel to be constantly defined that way? I'll start there. So Kim, do you want to start with that?
Oh man, you just opened a can of worms, Cannon.
Let's do it.
So literally every time we go to the doctor for any complaint, the first question they ask you is, when was your last menstrual cycle? Mm-hmm. It can have nothing at all to do with the symptoms that you're presenting with.
Yes.
Why? That's the most important thing they want to know. It's crazy. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you went in there and your foot was hanging off your leg, and the first question they would ask you is, when's your last menstrual cycle? So, right? These girls know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. And I also want to add that men can get pregnant. We have trans men that still have uterus and ovaries. And so all of this conjecture about what is a woman and a woman constitutes someone that can have a baby. I mean, these people have no idea what they're talking about. And yeah, it is really interesting to walk around with the uterus. That's all I'm going to say.
So Rashika, you felt that answer. So
yeah, I was talking about the period thing earlier. It is so annoying as a physician, I'll make sure never to do that. Yeah. If I become a physician, in the future. But yeah, like it's amazing. Like I don't know if this is just a Lubbock thing because this is a super conservative town or whatever. But like for instance, I have actually been told by someone who teaches me currently, like who is a girl herself, that all these things about being like a boss lady or whatever, get your own career, your own house, your own car. She doesn't really believe in it because, no man will want you if you're 40. and you have a career. It's like, keep in mind this woman is working on her PhD, so she's kind of a hypocrite on that. But that kind of thing, it's important to remember that this is sort of a side effect of men trying to control our bodies, because oftentimes in movies and stuff that are pro-choice or pro-woman or whatever, they make men out to be the bad guys, which they can be, but people forget women can be too. Women believe a lot of this stuff. They internalize that misogyny. And it's like, if someone, like one of my own research mentors is doing this, talking about how, men might not want me, or men might value me because of my, unfortunately men age like a fine wine. Women don't really do that. You can't have babies until you're 70 like men can.
Right.
But it's like, that's not everyone's goal in life. That's not I know I don't want to have kids. And it's like, if I was raped tomorrow, I sure would like to be able to have access to an abortion, to make sure everything I've worked so hard for the past 3 years of college is not gone down the drain. And I couldn't care less, honestly, if a man didn't want to marry me because my reproductive organs aren't going to be as fertile when I'm 35. I would rather be able to have a career and put food on my own table and have a roof that I paid for over my own head than worry about the next man who's going to come along and try to swim me off my feet.
Right.
Like,
Well, and as you were talking about that, it made me think about, so my sister has 3 kids, and her last one was considered a geriatric pregnancy, because she was over 35, and so the doctor, one of her doctors, was like trying to talk her out of doing this as she was trying to get pregnant, and they kept saying, the chances of deformity, like all these problems, like it doubles at this age. Well, what she found out was that it went from 1.5 to a 3% chance. And so there's all of this like hysteria behind it, that the doctors are creating, when it's like 3% chance, like most people would go ahead, and do that. That doesn't seem and so it, like, yes, our narrative, the way we think about it and talk about it, is so strange. So Caitlyn, what about you? How do you feel constantly being defined by?
Yeah. So honestly, that just kind of goes back to my point earlier. I think that Kate Man's like ameliorative conception of misogyny and just understanding of the patriarchy is super liberating. And I really hope to see like a shift in the understanding and definition of misogyny based on that, because I think that thinking of it as like the subjugation of women through the patriarchy, rather than like, oh, a dislike towards women or a prejudice towards women, really allows us to think about it more logically. And it allows us to kind of see like why it happens and like how we can explain it better. And we can kind of understand why misogynists have the advantage of like putting us in the role of mothers and putting us in the role of like, the domestic care people and like all of those things. And so I think that that's something that I'm hoping for, is that like we kind of like begin to think really critically about our roles and like how we're treating them and how they should be treated instead.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the things that you brought up there, like there's this weird dichotomy, there's this cognitive dissonance, because like Wishika was talking about how women keep being told like, you need a man to take care of you. Like if you want to appeal to a man, you need to be, you're infantilized because you shouldn't be in a place where you can take care of yourself. At the same time, part of this patriarchy is that men can't take care of themselves, and they can't do these basic things, which, as someone who has lived by myself for a long time, like I have a hard time understanding it. If I don't clean my house is dirty. Like there's no one here. And I'm like, no, men can do it. Like, and so why do you think we have this narrative, or what are problems that occur between having these two opposing narratives that people don't think are opposing? The fact that we infantilize women saying they need a man to take care of them, and then the fact that like men can't take care of themselves.
I think it goes back to parenting techniques. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to like speak about I guess like white culture or black culture or any other kind of culture. but I know in my culture, like Indian culture, moms especially treat their sons a lot more like babies than they treat their daughters. And eventually those sons grow up to expect wives who act like their mothers and do things for them, like cook and clean. And it's like, I know you can do those things, dude. You just don't want to. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I just, and you know, nowadays I feel like there has been a little bit of a cultural shift, at least in America, where men say these things. You know, I'm not in the dating pool myself, but I'll notice my peers who are in the dating pool, they'll say things like, oh yeah, I want a woman who cooks and cleans for me. But nowadays they want one more thing, which is also a woman who works a job. It's like, how much do you want me to do?
Right.
You can't expect me to stay in the kitchen all day. And then what, at night I go work a 12-hour shift?
Right.
What do you want? And then in my free time, I need to take care of your babies. I'm not a baby making machine who cooks and cleans for you. Pick one and stick to it.
And that description is a mother. Like they want a mother because that's what their mother did. Yeah, and that gets real creepy. So like Kim, what do you like? Why do we have these opposing narratives?
Well, I just want to comment first on something that I noticed when a father parents his child and people give him props and kudos and they're like, oh, look what a good job he's doing. He took the kids to the park. Oh, look, he cooked them dinner. He's giving them a bath. Like they get all of this kudos for doing just normal parenting work that women do every day and are, you know, they get no recognition for it. So for some reason, it's something special and spectacucular when the dad does it. In most cases, obviously, I don't like to make blanket statements, but by and large, that's what we see, right? Yeah, and you know, as someone who's been mostly single my life, and I raised my kids on my own, and you know, I had a successful career, still have a successful career. I was always, you know, my mom, when I was younger, wanted me to be one of those, you know, little kept women like Wishika was talking about, where I just found myself a nice husband that was just going to take care of me and the kids, and I could just cook and clean for him. And I wasn't going to have any part of that. I'm a feminist, like these girls are. I wanted to make sure that I could always take care of myself. And, you know, if there was, you know, a nice fellow that came along that I enjoyed, then that's because I wanted him there and not because I needed him there. I wasn't going to be stuck or kept. So I don't know. Maybe I bucked the system a little bit and I didn't go along with those norms.
Yeah. Well, and you know, with the father thing, I've noticed that when I post pictures of my niece and nephews, that like I can do the bare minimum. Like I can just post a picture of like me. The last one was me wrestling on a bed with my youngest nephew. People were like, "You're an amazing uncle." I was like, I was literally laying on a bed while we were watching. Like,
doing the bare minimum. Yeah.
Exactly. And then when I see, you know, women do the same thing that are aunts, they're like, I planned a 3-day vacation with my, you know, my 3 nieces and nephews and stuff, and like I've never done anything like that. And so yeah, that definitely I have seen that happen. What about you, Caitlyn? Have you had any experiences with this?
Just one thought I have with this is like in like the dichotomy there with the roles, like I think that there's a sense in which like it's coming to a point, especially now that women are like occupying like leadership roles and like having these strong careers. It's coming to a point where like for a while the patriarchy was heavily benefiting men, right? And it still is in a lot of ways, but it's like there's an element to it to where like they're kind of regressing in a sense, because now we have like these like well-rounded, like society-wise, we have this like well-rounded idea of a woman, but then the man is not so well-rounded. And so I think that like we can see how even with like just kind of like behaviors, we can see how that's kind of like negatively affecting society. Like all wars were started by men, and like all like there's so many instances of how like toxic masculinity and like a lack of like, you know, feminine values in men has like caused all these problems for society. And obviously that's not necessarily a biological difference. It's just like the patriarchy has done this. So that's just kind of one thing I think of. And I think it's kind of funny because like, while men obviously still have all these privileges, like in a sense, the patriarchy is even kind of like producing these like kind of like, suboptimal roles, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and that made me think of so one of my favorite writers is Alice Munro, and she wrote a story called Boys and Girls, and it's an incredible story. Everybody should go read it. It was my favorite thing to teach. And at the end, and it's about the narrator is this girl who's growing up, and she wants to be close to her father and work with the foxes. They raise foxes, and at the end. Her brother kind of tells on her and says, "Oh, she could have closed that gate and stopped the horse from getting out. She didn't." And her dad responds, "It's okay. She's only a girl." And it's this tragic, heartbreaking ending because the last line is, "I didn't argue with him, not even in my heart, because I knew it to be true." And it's so powerful. But I wanted to write my own version of that, and I was like, I want to write a story that ends with, "It's okay, he's only a boy." And then I realized that that story does not exist for males, because when the father says she's just a girl, what he means is she's not a boy. And she's not going to be a boy. But when someone says he's just a boy, what they mean is he's not a man. And so he will eventually be able to become a man. And I just had this moment of really realizing that contradiction in how we view men and women differently. Like there's not a point that when anyone is talking about boys, when they say something about, it's always in reference to being a man. And then if you're a girl, it's also always in reference to being a man. And so it just seems like there's no winning there. So let's talk about how do we start changing that narrative? Like, what do you feel like are solutions to these problems? And this can be like granular, like what do we do on the tech campus? Or this can be kind of larger, societal systemic changes. What do we need to see? Kim, do you want to go first?
Well, I think having these conversations is a good start. Having them in spaces with people who are maybe a little bit uncomfortable to have them, and allow them an opportunity for some unlearning to take place. We're taught from the time that we're born, all the way up through our childhood years, certain societal norms, and fair or not fair, they're put upon us, and we learn those things. And so, mentioned earlier that even some women fall victim to portraying the ideals of the patriarchy, and they believe that that's real and that's the way it should be done. And so, having these conversations, whether it's in small group or maybe larger classroom formats, allows that opportunity for some of that unlearning to take place. And I think that's where it starts.
Yeah. What about you, Caitlyn?
Yeah, I think that there's like a lot of things to be done. I mean, one thing that comes to mind is like somehow equipping the next generation and the current generation of parents to raise their children in a way that directly goes against like patriarchal norms. And like I think that like there's such a cultural influence, and so there's so many different aspects and so many different ways that we can influence it. But I think that like a lot of that comes down to like advocating and educating the public on it so that we can have that change in every single realm. And so, yeah, I think that obviously like organized work, advocacy is important. And then also supporting and electing female candidates to, Congress, to everywhere, so that we can have that voice. Because even in cases where a man is, in office and he's, advocating for women or representing women somehow, I think that it's so much more powerful and so much more real when it's like that direct representation. So I think that that's another element. But there's honestly, I mean, it's endless. The things, yeah.
And so, what about you, Wishika?
This may sound weird, but I think having a strong male figure in your life, whether or not it's in your household or just like a friend or something, is invaluable. So, for example, my father is probably one of the most feminist guys I know. And having someone like that in a position in my life who has raised me and had a big impact on the values I grow up with has helped me realize that if I don't accept crap from my dad, I don't need to accept crap from my senators. I don't need a man telling me what to do with my body, telling me how to act. it also affects like like women's personal relationships as well. I'm not even talking about abortion now. I'm just talking about usually domestic abuse. It's the man doing it to the woman and stuff like that. And I feel like if the girl growing up had like a strong male figure in the household, and by strong I mean someone who's not misogynistic, of course, and who knows the real value of a woman and teaches her that value, then she'll know not to accept that with guys she dates in the future, guys she marries, and of course, guys she votes for.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so one last question, then I'm going to let y'all go, and that is, what brings you hope? What gives you hope? Caitlyn, do you want to start us out?
Yeah, so I think that like both in like my newer work, you know, as an advocate and, you know, getting into organizing, I think that like seeing the community and seeing all of the effort put towards women's issues is definitely very inspiring. And then also I would say too, like, since I have done a lot of like research and studying, you know, a lot of feminist issues, I think that like seeing the like genuine progress of like our understanding of everything, and even like the improvements that we've already made, I think that that's also really inspiring. And I mean, both sides of those, both with advocacy and the academia side, like they both also definitely have their more downers as far as like, okay, well, our current situation is still very bad. But I think that there's a lot of hope in both of those realms. So that really gives me hope.
Wishika.
Seeing statistics and real life people who support abortion, or the, you know, ability to choose, I think to garner more hope in populations, especially those who are on the fence about whether or not they're pro-life or pro-choice, it's important to get guest speakers in organizations who either have been victims of abortions that were unsafe because of stupid legal restrictions, or people who have had safe abortions telling their stories of how the abortion saved their life. Because so often we hear in the news stories about, oh yeah, abortion, 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 we need access, but people don't actually see people in real life who have been affected by that legislation. Jane's Due Process, I think, is a great organization because you can see firsthand the impact you're making on people's lives. You can see it, you can touch it, you can immediately make an impact. And I hope my organization can become like that too.
Yeah, awesome. Kim, you got the final word.
So we are beginning to see more representation. We've all talked about that a little bit here, about getting more women and more people of color into higher leadership and legislative type roles. Most recently, Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, which is confirmed. And that's a great step forward for us. We're seeing lots of other representation. I mean, we've got Kamala Harris now, the first Black vice president of the United States. So every time we have a victory like that, it gives me more hope, because I know that, you know, we're moving in the right direction. And I know that it was really hard for all of those women to get to where they are, and that they fought a long, hard battle. But I'm just so happy that they'll stand up for us. And I'm happy that we all have the ability to vote in our local elections, because every election matters. And even your local elections, right? We've got a really important mayoral race coming up right now where there's only one candidate that voted against the sanctuary city ordinance here in Lubbock. And so I think just researching your candidates and knowing what's happening with those candidates and getting out to vote every time, that gives me hope, because I know that I have a voice in that, and I can go and exercise my voice at the polls.
Awesome. Well, thank y'all so much for being on. I think this was a really great discussion. I appreciate it. And I think everyone watching appreciates y'all's voices as well. So thanks. I'll see y'all. Bye.
Thanks for having us on. Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Usually I wrap it up with something, but I think Kim summed it up there at the end, and we're going to leave it there. Thank you for joining us, and I'll see you next week.